And we are live. Hello, Daphne.
Hello, Cliff. I find myself always making these funny faces when we go live. Like I'm like,
I know. Isn't it fun when the social media services just choose like at random, like the most embarrassing thumbnail ever?
I think that's why I do it. I think I'm like, okay, fine. If you're going to choose that, I'm going to lean in. I'm going to lean all
Let's
the
lean
way in.
all in.
Let's lean all the way in. Yeah. See? Well, and what are we trying to do? What are we trying to avoid? Are we trying to avoid something?
I want to avoid people perceiving me as anything different than the projection for which I desire for them to see me as.
Me too. I don't want anyone to think I'm nuts. Oh, wait, but I am. Yeah. But maybe secretly I do. This is a perfect segue into the show because today we're going to talk a little bit about prospect theory, which is where the idea of loss aversion comes from. This is Daniel Kahneman and Tversky's research. And I was inspired to talk about this weekend as I was going through. I've been going through these classes for professional drumming and music, and I noticed myself I had this one piece I had to learn, and it was a more technically challenging piece, and I found myself thinking to myself, boy, I really don't want to sound like crap on this. Which is reasonable. Okay, that's a reasonable thought. However, when I caught myself thinking that, I'm like, well, okay, you're focused on that, but maybe what do you have to gain here? Right? Like what's the positive that's going to come out of this? What is it that you really want? And I thought, well, really what I want is for this to be played well and sound well and learn the skills associated with this. And this is what I have to gain. And immediately the thought hit me. How much of my time and how much of anyone's time is spent really being afraid of the thing that we're going to lose by taking an action versus what there may be to gain given the same probability, the same likelihood of, in other words, you have a 50% chance of gaining this or a 50% chance of losing something. Where are you going to make your decision? So we're going to talk about this today, and then we'll get into the applications of how this gets into our life and really talking about loss aversion. It's not the same as risk aversion, by the way. So we'll stay away from the idea of risk aversion, but really loss aversion and how that can influence many of the choices that we make in our life. And again, this is going to come back to our consciousness, which you and I just spend hours talking about. And that's really what the show is, and the choices that we're making. So that's what we're going to talk about today, Cliff.
I can't wait and to see how much we're going to lose in the process.
Welcome to Life, the ultimate choose-your-own adventure game with hosts Cliff Ravenscraft and Daphne Scott. Join this dynamic duo as they explore the profound concept of life as a thrilling adventure, blending ancient wisdom and modern psychology. Embrace the joy of living with presence, creativity, and playfulness. It's time to navigate the game of life together. Are you ready to play? Let the adventure begin.
Let the adventure begin. So, Daphne, we're going to be talking, you said, about loss aversion. That's the way that I read it in the show outline. The idea of it's sometimes we'd be more willing to keep our life the way that it is.
Yes.
In spite of the fact that there's potential gain, that potential gain many times may not feel as good as what potential loss there would be.
Yes. And we have a bias. I think this is really what I wanted to bring out in the show. We all have this bias towards, losses hit us harder than the idea, and this is really important too. The idea, of a loss hits us harder than the idea of a gain, given the same probability. Right.
You gave some examples in the outline. Do you want to go straight there so people know what we're talking about, or did you want to build up to it?
I think we want to build up to it because I think I want to talk just a little bit first, about some of the other concepts we've covered in our other shows, by the way. And one of them was getting, that all of these things start to intertwine, right? They weave together. So for example, getting really clear about what you really want. And I think this is a little bit of an antidote. So I'm kind of probably getting into a little bit of the antidote to this to work with this bias that we have. But you had talked about people doing us all doing the 50 things exercise, right? The 50 things that we want. Yeah.
So we talked about that in a previous episode, you're saying?
Yes, we did. And the
Excellent.
reason
And for those that aren't aware, just to recap for those who may not have listened to some of the prior episodes in the archive, the 50 things you want is an exercise where you create a document and you make a list of 50 things. You make a list of 50 down on the left-hand column, do 1 through 25 on top of each other, flip the page over, do 26 through 50. And the whole idea is that you give yourself, let's just say 1 to 2 hours.
Yeah.
And you say, what do I want? And you cannot allow yourself to ask any questions like, is this possible? What would people think of me? Is this too materialistic? Is this too selfish? Is this wrong? Just if it comes to your mind, write it down until you have 50 items. And then the next part of the process is to create a list of your top 10 dreams, which you just go through and say, okay, out of these 50, which would be in my top 10? It's not important that they be in order. If you're making this process from going from the 50 down to your top 10, and you think of something that wasn't on the 50 that should be on the top 10, go ahead and put that new item on your top 10 and add it as a 51st or 53rd item. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
And then once you have your top 10, then you ask yourself, out of these top 10, you have your top 3 goals. This is what you're going to go after in life for right now in this season. And then this is the only one that's in order. So out of the top 10, what's the most important? That's number 1. Number 2, out of the 9 remaining, what's number 2 for you? And then number 3, out of the 8 remaining, what is most important? So now you have a list of 50 or more things that you want. You have a list of your top 10 dreams. And now you have clarity about what your top 3 goals are. That's this exercise that we're referring to.
Thank you, Cliff. That's the best summary ever. So, and I think what most people's experience is like, they can get to what, like maybe 15 things they want, 20 maybe.
My experience is that
most
people get stuck around 20, and some people said I could not get beyond 30 things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you didn't set your timer long enough. And if you sit there for up to 2 hours, you will be able to do this. And if not a big deal. Go ahead and sit there for an hour, get to as many things as you can, and then walk away from it for a day or two. But then go back. Do not go on to any other step until you've got 50 things.
That's right. Yep. So the reason I wanted to bring that up is not only just to reiterate the exercise, which I think is incredibly valuable for clarity and to get clear that we want these things. Is the reality is that we want stuff. There are things that we are attracted to that we're going to go towards. And then it's very natural for us to have these aversions, the things that we don't want. And what we brought up in one of our other episodes was what happens when we get focused on what we don't want, right? And how that changes, that focus of attention changes the reality that we're creating for ourselves. So I brought that up. I think it's also an antidote to working with this natural loss aversion that we have, right? When we're sort of unconscious, when we're unaware of that's what's happening. So what I think is really fun, and I don't know if you've noticed this, and I'd be curious your experience in life, Cliff, is how much time we spend trying to make things just so we can avoid the things we don't want.
Yeah, as you were talking earlier, you were talking about something. It's like, I want this to be just right. I don't want any imperfection. I want to be able to present this in this way. And it reminds me, I just recently did a podcast episode with a dear friend of mine. And that podcast episode was originally scheduled so that we could market a product or service for this individual. Okay. And I had suggested, hey, I will be delighted to have you as a guest on my show. And I would not do this for hardly anyone on this planet, but for this person, I said, I will be delighted to have you as a guest on my show. You know my standards of what I desire to provide to my audience. So this can't be just a commercial. That's just assumed. Yeah. So as long as you can come up with a compelling topic that will be valuable, more than happy to use that conversation at the end to promote your product. I believe in you. I believe in your products. I know some of my audience will benefit from it, but as long as the conversation that we have, And when it came time for us to record, what happened was he decided, you know what, I don't feel like we should actually promote what I thought we were going to promote. And
Oh,
I'm like, great, what are we going to talk about? Well, he had he had a title, and I wasn't quite clear where that title was going to go. I should have maybe asked some more clarifying questions, but I wanted to just get into it, and I figured we have enough of a relationship, we can create anything. Lo and behold, I have an hour-long conversation with my friend that there's no doubt in my mind that I enjoyed the conversation. He enjoyed the conversation. There's valuable nuggets that came within the conversation, but that conversation happened Wednesday of last week,
okay.
and it sits unedited, unprocessed, and unpublished on my desktop. And I'm questioning, do I put this in my podcast? And the
Oh,
reason why is because there's a little bit of a loss aversion. And the thought is I made a commitment to my audience and to myself. I will never publish another episode of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show unless I feel that the content was inspired, and also that I have a strong feeling like there's no way this audience, it's not in, I couldn't go to sleep with a good conscience if I didn't release this episode. I think it's that important to hear.
mm,
So that's the standard that I've set for myself.
right.
Now, when I think about this recording, and I've thought about it a great deal, that this does not meet that standard. And so there is a little bit of a loss aversion of that. And let me explain to you, not only is there the loss of holding myself to a standard, but in some ways there's like, okay, one of the benefits that I've gotten from the Cliff Ravenscraft Show is somebody says, wow, Cliff, I discovered you on some other platform.
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard that you had a podcast, and I listened to your podcast, the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And then your most recent episode blew my mind. It was so amazing. And then I listened to the one before that, and it was even better. And then the one before that was even better. And it's like, and so this person says, I have binge listened to your podcast. I've listened to like 20 episodes in the last 3 weeks. Now, by the way, that's 20 hours of
Yeah.
content.
Yeah.
So my fear, if you will,
Yes.
is that I will lose the bingeability of my podcast by publishing this episode that isn't bingeable.
Yeah. That's so great. And there's no thought that comes into your consciousness. Well, yes, that might be possible. There also could be the possibility that if I go ahead and publish this, and we'll get into your standards in a second. So I do want to comment on that. But if I go ahead and publish this, there could also be the possibility that more than a handful of people find this just as binge worthy, find this just as valuable. And I could go ahead and just publish it.
Absolutely. And I've
Right.
thought about that. I could publish it as is, no editing. The other thing that I have thought about, and the reason why it still sits on my desktop, which you and I have a different thing about computer desktops today. But anyway,
The desktop of your life.
the desktop of my life. But one of the reasons it's sitting there is because I happen to know that if I really wanted to, I could go through, I could do some nice fine point editing. I could make all of the bullet point notes of the value that I think is there. And then once I have all of that, I intentionally did not record an intro to our conversation. I just hit record, we started, because I knew I'd want to record the intro later. So
Mhm.
I can actually create an intro that pre-frames the value for people to be on the lookout for.
Yep.
And I can also express a little bit of the background of how this podcast came about, how I originally had some hesitation about whether or not I would publish it. I could create this to meet my standards.
Yes.
But my only thing is, Daphne, is how much energy do I have behind my desire to do that right now? And so far, for the last several days, the answer has been not much.
Yeah, not much. And so let me rewind just a bit. So one of the things that I did here is that part of what you're catching in your own consciousness is, look, just set all the things that you could do aside. The truth is, I can catch a part of my consciousness and what I'm believing, that I can see clearly there's a loss aversion there. I'm afraid about losing something about
Yep.
publishing this. So that's the first and most important thing. Once you see that clearly, then you're like, okay, I got that. If I wanted to, so now your standards come into play, right? So, and it is true that I have certain standards, and I know you very well. You have very high standards for audio quality. You have very high standards for video quality. You want to put out great content that people can easily digest. It needs to be inspired content. I mean, I think we share a lot of those similarities. We wouldn't be putting effort into the show that we do. So, you have the standard part of it. And then you say, okay, if I really feel called to publish this, then here's what I would need to do to bring this to the standards that I have for myself. Which
Right.
isn't right. Which at that point now you've left the world of I'm afraid of losing something. You're in the world now of, okay, I could see that I could lose something if I just put this out the way that it is, or I tell myself there's a story there. And if you want to know what we mean by a story, please go listen to our Byron Katie episode and find Byron Katie. But I can catch that. More so, though, I do have standards about what I want this to sound like. I have standards about the quality that I'm providing to my audience and the people that are relying on me. And I want to get this up to the quality standards. And I could do that. But now when I check in with myself, I'm like, okay, how many hours do I want to spend doing that, if any, or minutes in your case? Just probably minutes instead of hours. I don't know. But how much time do I want to spend doing it? Now when I check in with myself, I notice, that I don't feel called to do that right now.
Yeah.
Right. I don't feel so. I mean, this is a great demonstration, Cliff, just as we're, and I appreciate you so much for sharing the story, because it's a great demonstration of moving past or moving through this. Hey, I'm not going to do this simply because I'm afraid of losing something.
Well, let me speak to the other side of this.
Yeah.
So, by the way, the podcast that we're talking about, it's the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. You can find it at thecliffravenscraftshow.com. or in any of your favorite podcast directories. It's got over 700 podcast episodes.
Yeah.
Now, the first 550, maybe 600 or so episodes, once a week, every week, no more, no less. Every Friday morning by 5 a.m., there was an episode.
Yeah.
Now, you do to the number 52 weeks times that many. It's been many years, imagine.
Yes.
Many, many, many years I've published an episode every single week.
And by the way, in many hours, I mean, I think this is the side that people don't see. It's sort of like, I mean, maybe you would just hit the record button and start talking, but there's some thought that goes into these things, right? There is some planning that goes into these things. There's all the work before the product is actually shipped, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want you to think about this. My story, my narrative that I was telling myself is that, well, first of all, I am seen as a content creator, and that's not the only podcast I have. I have several others, but this was my main show. This is the show that generates my business. It's the one that reflects my business the most. Like my business professional side. This is the business where, if somebody was to wonder, who is Cliff Ravenscraft? What kind of work does he do in the world? The Cliff Ravenscraft Show, formerly known as Podcast Answer Man, is what you would actually listen to. That's what I would recommend. And that's the whole thing. And so people who have never heard my name before, they come to listen to this show. People who have never heard of me, they come to know me, they come to like me, they come to trust me. I'm consistent. I show up all of the time. After all of these years, after so many people have pod faded, I am the guy who is consistently there.
Pod faded? So, I've never heard that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's an old style term.
I love it.
So the idea was, I was getting to the place where, and this happens, when you're consistent every single week, I still had high standards. Mm-hmm. And there were often times when it came time, it's like, hey, Friday is coming up. I need to publish an episode, and I will put something out that is less than stellar. It's creating content for the sake of creating content. And you can't produce 52 episodes a week every single week and have a 10 out of 10 episode. It just doesn't happen all the time.
That's right.
So
probably true.
And what happened was what I made up for in my lack of consistency in 10 out of 10 episodes, if I'm going to have a 7 out of 10 episode, I'm still going to put energy into it. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a little quirky. It's going to be whatever, but if it doesn't have the educational value, it's at least going to have the entertainment value. And so I kind of went on with all this other stuff. But over time, I recognize it's like, man, I am sharing a lot of stuff, just throwing things out there. And I've recognized there's a lot of value in not sharing everything, if you know what I'm saying.
I do know what you're saying.
And so I just got to the place where it's like, wait a second, you know what? I don't know that I want to continue to publish every single week just because I've always published every single week.
Yeah.
And so I began to question that. And then the thought was, what if I stopped producing this show on a weekly basis? And then you talk about loss aversion.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Because at that point, I had never heard anybody talk about the binge worthiness of my podcast.
Right.
I didn't know that benefit would come as a result on the other side. All I knew is that I would potentially lose a very sizable portion of my audience who desire for me to show up every week in their life.
Yeah.
And by the way, I did.
Okay. I didn't want to skip too far ahead in the story. I was like, and did you?
And I did. I lost about 70% of my audience over the next 2 years.
However,
70%.
Let me ask you this, however, though, because I know enough of your story that I think I can ask this question. Were you also shifting away from being the podcast answer man to the mindset answer man? So your topics were shifting too.
Yeah, the topic shifted as well. I said, listen, I'm no longer going to be talking about the technical aspects of podcasting. Yeah. I'm going to be speaking about mindset, personally, professionally, mostly as it relates to building an online brand, putting yourself out into the world, taking your message to the world, living a life of fulfillment and purpose, breaking free from the limiting beliefs and all this other stuff. And yes, those 70% that left was there because they wanted the technical advice, the latest review on software and tools related to the industry of podcasting. So that did play into it as well.
Yeah.
But and by the way, that was another big deal because I did at the same time, I was actually rebranding from Podcast Answer Man to the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, which was another big loss aversion thing that I had to deal with.
I mean, Cliff, I know enough, again, about your history and your story as you do mine to really appreciate, and I think I've even told you this too, like one of my things I love about you is your ability to just say, this is no longer what I want to be doing, or this is no longer working, and I'm going to shift it into something else. And that's really the essence of what we're talking about in today's episode, is how we have this experience of something not working well, something that no longer fits for us. I've gone through it too, several times, leaving the work that I'm doing or doing it in a different way, and feeling sort of, I know my current state is not what I want. I'm clear about that. I know it's not working for me. And yet when I look at letting go of it, I am terrified of all the things that will go. I'm much more concerned about all the things I'm going to lose, including my misery. I'll lose my misery. What will that be like? And I'd rather hang out of that and have to make this shift into something else, which fits a little bit back into our certainty, wanting some level of certainty. There's some truth to that, I think. However, in this theory, this prospect theory and this loss aversion idea, it goes even deeper than that we simply have a very low tolerance for the experience or the belief around the experience we're going to have around loss. So you have pivoted several times and shifted several times in your business and had to go through that. So I think one of the experiences, I think when you shut down, and you've spoken about this a little bit, but when your experience about when you decided to shut down, and by the way, this fits into economics quite a bit too. So I think this is where the rubber hits the road. When you decided to shut down the podcast side of your business. So I'd love to hear you talk about the loss aversion you went through with that, because this isn't just a branding thing at this point. This is you were literally saying, this is my major income stream. I'm no longer going to do it this way. I'm going to go do this. So I think this is pretty astounding. Yeah. So
the story is that first I made a decision to leave a 12-year career as an insurance agent.
I hope you don't feel like I'm turning our podcast and I'm just going to interview.
But the thing is that first I
Great
actually left
story.
a 12-year insurance career in a family-run insurance agency owned by my
Uh-huh.
mom and dad, started by my grandfather in 1937, and I left that job security to start a career in podcasting, which was just started out as a hobby.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is what I want to do with my life. And the first year I only made $11,000 net income. And I'm like, it was the most anxiety and worry and self-doubt, but it was also the most fulfilling, the highest highs of my life. And I
Yeah.
celebrated. And after I got out of the hospital where I almost died in the following
This is
January,
what you're signing up for, people. Just
I
take
I
it from us.
literally I I literally destroyed my gallbladder with all of that stress. But anyway, when I came out of that, I started a personal and professional development journey, and I went all in on the thing that most people said that they wanted from me,
Yeah.
and that is, can you teach me how to launch a podcast? Over the years, I trained more than 40,000 people how to launch a podcast. And I had built my podcasting business to where I was generating $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
So $500,000 a year on average. The only thing is, Daphne, is after 10 years as the podcast answer man, I literally hated my work life.
And isn't this, I want to say this, I want to benchmark or asterisk this. Isn't this great? Not that you hated your work life, but I think what is great is that, and I think this is part of, the uncertainty and unpredictability of life, that you had a job, a career as in insurance. You started to recognize, I don't want to keep doing this. I love podcasting, and I
Yeah.
am going to teach people podcasting. And after a certain period of time, you start, we'll say time, but after a certain period, you started to also wake up to then, oh, now this isn't really doing it for me anymore either. Right? Like I'm saying either, but it's just if you can accept sort of the unpredictable nature of life and say that, like, I'm flowing through this river of I'm doing this, and now I'm recognizing that it's going to go this way. And your willingness to work through that loss aversion, right? To not sit with the status quo. I imagine that you probably could still be teaching podcasting or some aspect of it.
The answer to that question is, I love that you said you could imagine it. I can't.
Well, I mean, not you as a person, but I mean, you energetically, there's no way. I mean,
Yeah,
I imagine
because I
sort of
could.
there's somebody teaching it probably somewhere.
Since I left the world of podcasting behind, have I had $500,000 a year? The answer is no.
Mhm.
But I've always had way more than what I need. Way more than what I need. And I get way more than what I need in exponentially less time. So on average, I make about 7 times more per hour doing
Yeah.
what I do today than what I did then. And I just don't desire to work as much as I did then.
Right.
And I don't need to. So there's all of that. But then the thing is even in the work that I do today, there are some times when I have extremely high levels of marketing and all this other stuff, and I bring on board, and let's just say I need at least $20,000 a month in my business and I'm a solopreneur. So I need $20,000 a month in my business to make ends meet. And I do a couple of things. And for 18 months straight, I was hitting $30,000 a month.
Yeah.
That's way more than what I need. And so during an 18-month period of time, I went without marketing any new clients because I'm like, this is amazing. Until a year later, when some of those contracts rolled off, all of a sudden I start seeing, the income dropping down. And Daphne, here's the interesting thing. There have been times, so there's been major or flows, but then there have been ebbs as a result of my own action or inaction. And during the times when I'm like, oh my gosh, I think after a decade of doing my business, I might make less than $12,000 this month, which is not, it's not acceptable for my lifestyle that I want to live and all this other stuff. And the thought had occurred to me, all I have to do is go turn on this Kajabi course called Podcasting A to Z and send out one email, and I would instantly instantly $20,000, $30,000. I mean, it's literally there for me at all times.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in some pretty serious ebbs from time to time of my own making. And not once could I actually get myself to pull the trigger of offering a podcasting course.
Yeah. Yeah. So energetically, I mean, it's just not in your DNA any further to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So that I absolutely hear that. And I know that's true. And so, but you could have kept, my point is that you could have stayed in the status quo because your risk, your loss aversion was so great of losing this income. What's it going to mean for my life? Losing my audience, losing people that are relying on me, disappointing people, so on and so forth.
This now that we're in this conversation, Daphne, I'm wondering if the way that I see the world doesn't contradict the theory of this loss aversion thing.
Well,
because for me, there was a bigger loss aversion. And it wasn't the loss aversion of what I've known and what I am confident that will create income and all of this other stuff.
Yeah, what was it?
But for me, there was a bigger loss aversion. And that was a loss of me doing what I knew is more aligned with who I am and what I want to be in the world.
Yes.
And that's the loss aversion.
Yes.
So if there's any loss aversion that I have is that if I continue as the podcast answer man, the true essence of who I am dies every day.
There you go.
That's what I will lose.
Yeah. And that is the reframe on all of this. That's exactly what I'm pointing to, is that so often we think about the first side of what we're going to lose. So this is how loss aversion, when we're clear about what we really want, which is why I brought up the 50 things exercise first. When we're really clear about what we really, really want and what we desire, the idea of losing that, this is where loss aversion's to our benefit. The idea of losing that becomes greater than losing the status quo.
Yes.
Yes. And being able to see that clearly is what's really helpful. When we're in the throes of the more, what I describe as more of the constricted side of loss aversion, when we're in the throes of that, right? That constricted side, like I've worked with people who are in a relationship. They don't want to be in a relationship that they're in anymore, right? Well, what I could lose is my house, and I could lose the kids, and I could lose and it goes on and on, the money, right? Well, yes. And you also can gain a lot of your life back. Right now, you're also losing your happiness. You're losing your joy. You're losing your peace. You're losing your calm. You're losing the simple way of living your life. And that's what you're talking about, right? You're like, so, well, really, what am I losing? I'm losing myself. I'm abandoning myself in this whole process. So how do we get there?
I love everything you just said, and for the most part of my life, that's exactly how I think, and I think I still think a lot of that. But something that comes up for me, and it is something that I'm testing the waters of, is for me, I just said, it's like, wow, the thing that if I was still, if I woke up every day and there's 14 quick questions about the technical aspects of podcasting, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I don't get any of those questions anymore, which is so amazing. It took so long to get out of people's head that's what you come to me for.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, the whole idea of, man, you would lose the joy, you would lose all this. And then the question is, where is the source of joy? Where is the source of peace? Where is the source of fulfillment? And there's a part of me that knows that it's not actually in the doing of the other thing.
Sure.
And that if I were somehow in a society or a culture and that I was forced against maybe my will to continue to be the podcast answer man, there's a part of me that knows that okay, here's the thing. I don't live in a world where I'm forced against my will to do that.
Not yet.
So not yet. Thank you, Daphne. But here's what I do know. I do know that I could, if it were required of me, genuinely required of me, I do believe that I could be at peace, completely fulfilled and satisfied and have a joy-filled life doing that work. I know for a fact that that's possible because I've determined and have come to the conclusion so far is that my peace, love, and joy is not anything in the external. It's with the internal. But given the
Well,
fact
I
of
would say
knowing who
and
and thank you,
and
and given, thank you. I told you last week I'm working on this whole yes
and
yes, all of that.
yeah.
And the truth is, though, that I do know that there are other options available, and it doesn't make sense given the fact that I'm only allotted a certain number of years on this planet
Yes.
to not do the things that are aligned with what I most want to do in this world.
Yes. And Cliff, what we're
That's
really,
it.
yeah, that's it. I mean, as a matter of fact, you said that. I have my life calendar behind me. I actually just checked off what week are we in this year? 18, 19? At the age of 53. So that's what's behind me. I can see how many weeks I potentially have left if I live to the age of 90. I'm halfway through the calendar. It's a good
Yep.
reminder. And yes, and what we're really pointing to is, again, it's the consciousness from which we're making these choices. And that has ramifications for our life. That yes, our peace, love, joy, calm absolutely comes from within. I that is my experience again and again, that if I am dependent on external circumstances to go the way that I want them to go, to be at peace and to have joy and feel calm, good luck. Because I don't know if you've noticed or not, but often the external circumstances do not go the way that I think they should, right? Or the way that I would prefer. However, this is us playing in both worlds, right? There's sort of this conventional world and this, what I call the non-conventional world. And we're playing in both of these. This is our human and our being experience that kind of converge, they weave together. Given the fact that it seems as though I can take some actions and I can make some choices, why not? Why not?
Yeah.
Right? Why stay in a space where I'm not being forced to do certain things? So yes, we absolutely can. I think what I want to point to is really when we are constricting ourselves around these choices, around the fear that we've created, and again, specifically the loss, calling this out specifically because it is such a bias that we can have, that circumstances change and the mindset we can go into is, this is going to be a disaster, right? This
Well,
is going to be horrible.
Yeah, there is the catastrophizing of the unknown. And I think our
Yeah.
ego throws up that narrative because it wants to keep us safe.
Absolutely.
And what is known, even if it's uncomfortable and undesirable, at least it's
Yes.
known.
Yes.
And also, there's so much of our identity involved in this. This is who I am. This is how people see me.
Yes.
Matter of fact, because I do this and I hold this title, I do this thing, I add value in this way. This is why people respect me.
Yeah. And the
And
thoughts
wow,
that,
if I leave that, then I lose all of that respect. I may be ousted from this community. These people may no longer associate with me because for any other number of reasons.
that's right. I mean, all the thoughts, like, I can just go on and on about these, we could dig up all the negative thoughts. Like, I can't handle it, if I can't handle it and this goes poorly, it's going to be on my shoulders and people will think poorly of me, right? It's all our security, control, approval that we have. And so we drift. And I think that is a very good, and I love what you said about the ego, because it is only trying to keep us safe. Makes sense.
Yep.
So the more that we can recognize those patterns, I think that's where we start to work through and to know how to work with these things. And I'd be curious really how you work through these things when you were, and how I worked through them. I mean, my first corporate job, I walked away and left. I found out later, and it's really great. It's a great story. $2 million on the table. I knew I had a general sense of what that was worth. I could no longer stay in that job. I couldn't do it. My misery and unhappiness for myself, and not at the cause of anyone else per se. It wasn't about another person that was making me, that was in my life that I wasn't enjoying, but it was really just the work itself. It no longer aligned. I was so drawn to doing this other work in the world. Energetically, I just couldn't stay
you
there.
had the opportunity.
Yes.
I could stay in this job. I
Yes.
could leave this job. Both are available to me.
Yes. And fast forward years later, all the loss, and I think this is really the crazy part of the whole thing, and I think this is true for you too. All the loss that I thought I was going to experience never happened.
Yeah.
None of it.
Well, in many ways, some of the loss of things that I thought would happen, I want to say just for those, because I believe you could lose.
Yes,
I
you
believe
can.
some of your worst case scenarios, some of those could come true.
They could. Yes. I think that's very important.
Absolutely. And I've witnessed that in my own life. Some of the things that I feared would come true if I leave this and go here.
Yep.
Some of that has happened, some in various different things. And as a coach, I've witnessed other people leave one thing behind and their worst case fears did become reality as well.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, though, in my life and in all of those people's lives, whenever one has clarity about who they are and what and how they want to be in this world,
Mhm.
none of that matters.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the
It
take
doesn't
home
matter.
message. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You're willing to accept those. I do want to bring out the exercise too. This is another sort of exercise to do with this, and it's my favorite. It's one of my favorites. And it's going to sound so counter, I think, to how you probably experienced me and probably how most people experience me. If you've coached with me, though, you will know this is an exercise. I call it worst case scenario. And I figured this out many, many years ago as I was working through my process of leaving different careers and taking on different responsibilities and doing different roles in the world. I would play it out with myself and be like, okay, you're going to make this choice. You feel called to make this decision. It aligns with who you are. What is your worst case scenario? And oftentimes it would end with some version of either death, which seems a little stark, but having to move back in with my mom. Like I lose all my money. I have nowhere to
Well,
live. I have to move back in with my parents. And so even when I played out the worst case scenarios, and then I would ask myself, would you be willing to accept, if let's pretend all of those things could happen, would you be willing to accept those to be able to go on this next part of your journey? Would it be worth it? Because you don't know what the next part of the journey is going to bring either. It could bring all of the gains and all to what you were talking about, all of the positive parts of this existence. Would you be willing to accept those if it allowed you to go on this journey, if you could be successful elsewhere? And the answer was always yes. The answer was always yes. I'm willing to accept that these things could, and I think it's really important, Cliff, that you said this too. Those things could happen. Would you be willing to accept those things to be able to go on this next part of your journey? My answer was always yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have had the privilege of working with countless people where I've been able to do the worst case scenario
Yeah.
and they come to the same conclusion. Yes, absolutely. Who I am, I have so much clarity, all this other stuff. I'm willing to go through whatever to
Yep.
get to the other side of whatever's out there. I don't even know what it is, but
Yeah.
yes. However, even just within the last 7 days, I coached somebody who is in a terrible situation. And I asked, what's the worst thing that could happen if you got this person out of your life?
Mhm.
And well, I wouldn't have a car. I wouldn't have a house. I wouldn't have this. Well, what about your parents? Both my parents are dead, and all this other stuff. And it's like, well, do you so your belief is that if this happens, you will lose your house and you will be homeless. Is that true?
Mhm.
And in her mind, it was, and she just could not see any realm of, you know what, I'm not willing to go into a women's home or
Mhm.
a food bank or any of these other things. That's just what it's like. No, I still am willing to put up with all the things that I told you here at the opening of my conversation. And so the ambivalence, which is
Yes.
something that I'm reading about in motivational interviewing, the book that you had recommended to me,
Yes.
the ambivalence is still very high there. They're
Yes.
still weighing all of the benefits that go along with suffering through the pain that they're currently experiencing.
Yeah, and let's just give a moment to that, because I think, again, in the world of understanding ourselves, in the world of our own, I would say, self-inquiry, in the world of, working through the stuff of life that we need to work through, like, let's really give some breath to that, because that is a real experience, I think, for all of us. There's this period of ambivalence. That's the word, right? And it's my favorite word. It used to get couched as resistance. I'm not a fan of that word at all. It's not my experience in working with people, but we are doing this. right? We're weighing, we're sort of thinking through, we're trying to decide like, oh my gosh, the suffering, and that is some of it too. You can come to your choices, and often we do, just some level of suffering and some level of being pulled by a vision. Now I'm a big fan of being pulled by a vision versus what I call being shoved by suffering, right? If I can choose, I would much rather be pulled by a vision. Nevertheless, there's probably a combination of both of it, and we can live in the space of ambivalence. I think the more that we can understand our own sort of leanings and biases and, which is what we do as coaches, right? Helping people sort of navigate through those things, then the more beneficial it becomes. And maybe the choice does end up being like, I am just going to stay here because it's just ultimately better for me, or what have you. And that's fine too. I think it's more about making a very intentional choice. And
Yeah, I
also
love that you
seeing that we're at choice.
I want to camp there for a second. Are you making an intentional choice? I can tell you what I just referred to a moment ago. There was a part of me where it's very clear that in my mind, there's a logical, it's like this,
Yeah.
get out of this, right? It's
Yeah.
like whatever.
This is crazy.
And in many ways, sometimes I'd be hired for people to say, can you talk me into making this decision?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Probably
nope.
not.
No, I even if well, the answer is yes, I could.
Yeah,
Because
probably.
I'm a very persuasive person. The answer is yes, I could, but no, I won't.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe there is a right or wrong decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't believe there is a right or wrong decision. There is no way for any of us to know what will happen on the other side of going or staying.
That's exactly right.
And whatever you intentionally choose is right because it's what you chose and it's the path that you're on.
Yes.
The question is are you choosing your own adventure?
That's it. Wow. You just summarized the whole show. That is it. I mean, are you, even when we're in our work and it seems like something's being imposed upon us, right? That happens a lot for people and, in organizational life, a decision is made. You weren't involved in the decision. You may not have had even any input in the decision. And yet you're expected to execute on this. And the reality is you can, or you can choose not to. And often people, and what I mean by choose not to is you may not continue working there anymore. But oftentimes what happens is there's this ambivalence, there's this path that comes up where I don't want to execute on these things. And so now I grind down into my fear about it. I grind down into my own misery around it, instead of seeing that you really do have a choice. And you can continue to campaign for your choice and do all these other things too, but you really are at choice. And that is, and being first wise enough, I think, on some level to check in with, what is it that I'm scaring myself with about this choice? What is it that I'm telling myself? How am I scaring myself about losing something? One of the things you could be scared about losing is control, for example. Right? I feel like I'm losing control. Well, what is it about that? And just seeing all of those pieces of it and then getting to, well, what can be gained by this choice? What do I have to gain from this? Or what do I have to gain from leaving? This choice doesn't align with me. I think that's what you were talking about too, Cliff, is like, this doesn't align with my, me being the podcast answer man, that doesn't align with me. Me staying within a corporate organization as a full-time employee didn't align with me at a certain point. And going out on my own to do things. So I think it's getting back to that. And yeah, that is your adventure. That's what you're choosing. And how fun is that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
And that's the whole purpose, I think, of our entire show, is to say, hey, you have options
Yes.
in any and all situation. You have options and you get to choose, and you're the one who chooses. And it seems sometimes that other people are making our choices and that they're in control,
Yes,
but so much, way more than we will ever give ourselves credit for, is our choice.
absolutely. And we are always at choice. We're choosing our adventure. Yeah, I think that's it. Well, I don't have more to say on that. I do want I do want to say a bit about, and I know we have a couple calls to action today too. So just, I think we brought up so many things I think that I want people to just be cognizant of, as they're going through making their choices, and noticing when they're wanting to maintain the status quo because they're afraid that XYZ could happen. And again, coming back to these stories that we're telling ourselves. And I think that's, they don't talk about that in the loss aversion literature. And they primarily talk about this most in finance and economies, like what it drives us to do. For example, we start losing a little bit on a stock and people sell right away instead of staying in. They kind of have all these sorts of things. And I think we can see that in our own life reflected in just our life choices, right? Where we maintain the status quo. But I think really giving some compassion to that for ourselves as humans on the planet, and then noticing when we're falling into that, I think is really the trick. So
yeah, that's when I was reading the show notes outline that you had prepared for this episode. One of the things I like is being cognizant of the fact that loss aversion is a part of our human nature.
Yeah.
It really is a part of our condition to evaluate things and not to want to lose. And one of the things you gave in there was you just talked about the stock market, but there was something else. It's like if somebody were to give you $500.
Yeah.
And do you remember the exact example? It was something like
Yeah.
you had an option to either potentially double it or guarantee.
There's a couple. You can invest $1,000 in a new company, and this is where the probabilities come, right? So either the company's going to make it or it's not. Okay. So with a 50% chance of doubling your money, so I can invest 1,000 and make 2,000, or a 50% chance of losing 1,000, we typically will not invest in it because we don't want to lose $1,000, even though the same probability is for us to make 2,000. There were a couple examples in there. There was one I brought up about, there was this, and I forget which podcast I was listening to, but they talked about people being shocked. And this fits into the uncertainty part of it. So people had more anxiety when they were told you only have a 50% chance of receiving this electric shock. They would have more anxiety about that than when they were told you have a 100% chance of being shocked because they knew the shock was coming. And I think that fits in. Those examples sort of fit in with this like loss aversion and how that fits into the certainty and uncertainty, right? I know that, what is that statement? The devil or something? When we talk about the status quo, like I know how to do this thing. This is comfortable, even though I'm miserable. I'm comfortable. I know this thing. To take the risk and to make the change to go into something I don't know can become paralyzing, right? It's just easier for me to maintain it. Yeah.
One of the examples that really stuck out to me kind of reminds me of the old Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or whatever. And you get up there and you answer a bunch of easy questions. And the next thing you know, you've got like you're up to $500,000. Do you want to take your $500,000 home?
Yes.
Or do you want $1 million?
Yes.
And so it is fun to see, some people, they overcome the loss aversion and they go to the million and then they walk away with nothing.
Yeah.
And the question I have is, did they ever lose anything?
That's such a
good question.
Because
if you think about it, did they ever have the 500,000?
Nope.
Because if you think about it, they never had the 500,000 because they would have had to actually say no to the potential of answering the question to get the million to have the 500,000. So in a way, the reason why I think some of those people are able to overcome the loss aversion because they never had the 500,000. They never had it in the first place. So I like to think about all of that. And then the other thought that came to my mind, and I don't know if it's related, and I'll see if you can find a way, or if we can find a way together to tie it in.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite thoughts is that when I was born into this world, Daphne, I didn't bring any money with me out of the womb.
You didn't?
I don't know about you. But there was no money that I brought with me. And no matter what adventure I choose in life, I might potentially be able to bury my physical body with lots and lots and lots and lots of cash.
Yeah, like King Tut.
Exactly. But as far as I know, it's not going anywhere beyond the grave. So wherever I am, that money won't be.
Probably not. Probably safe.
So one of the thoughts that I have is like, well, I came into this world with nothing and I built all of what I have.
How fun.
And think about this. When I came into the world, everything was gain. Everything is possible. And it's ironic because the way I think of it today is the more we gain, and with the human condition of loss aversion, the more we gain, the less options we have.
There is some truth
in our mind. In our mind.
Yes.
But that's the only place that our options are limited. It's the stories we tell ourselves about what is ours and what we will lose.
Yeah. And I will tie this in, because I think what you start talking, when we get really trapped in the idea of what we can lose, it no longer feels like a game.
Yeah.
Right? It no longer, we can't. And you talked about coming into the world, like you have chosen and I've chosen to, if you choose to see this as a game that we're playing, that it is this big adventure, then that kind of recedes into the background a little bit. That loss aversion really can start to it's there. I mean, I have it too, but it takes more of a back seat, and you get more interested in, like, wow, I'm just going to choose this. I wonder what will happen. I have no idea. It could be the best
and
of my life.
And the big thing is just the awareness of your loss aversion.
Yes.
Just know it's there.
Yep.
Don't judge yourself for having it.
Nope.
It's perfectly fine. And if you find that your loss aversion is causing you to be ambivalent, consistently, ongoing, persistently weighing the costs and benefits over and over, and you stay where you are, well, wherever you are, that's what you've chosen for now, and it's still a choice. And just know that you are making a choice. And the question is, are you being intentional about your choice? And even if you choose to stay in your ambivalence, it's still a choice. The question, though, is, are you conscious? Are you aware that that's the choice you're currently making?
Perfectly stated. I have nothing else to add to this topic on that note.
What's your call to action this week, Daphne?
Well,
I can't wait to hear.
Yeah, well, I wanted to make, especially for my friends here, and I know they're listening, that are in leadership positions or going into a leadership position, I did want to call out that I do have my Waking Up a Leader course on my website. So you can find it at 3ws-daphne-scott.com. It is really, it's a soapbox issue for me. I'll just tell you that right now. I was promoted into my first leadership position because I was just really good. At the time, I was a physical therapist. I was really good at treating a lot of patients, and was taught zero skills, had zero skills, and just struggled through my first year or 2 years in leadership, and leading people, expect a leader group of people, by the way, with zero training. Why not? So it became a real soapbox issue, in true Daphne fashion. I did everything I could to start learning. Like, there's got to be somebody that knows how to do this. Right? I just, figuring this out on my own, and started to read and got really exposed to a lot of great people who did know how to teach the skills of leadership. So that is what that course is all about. And I would highly recommend it if you have been put into a leadership role where you are expected to drive results with a team of people, you are expected to manage a budget, you have people that are reporting to you directly, that this course is something that's going to be of immense support to you, because it goes through, it's 10 weeks, and it goes through, these are the 10 critical pieces that you need to know. And the first part of it really is all about our consciousness. It really is about how we're relating to things and how we're seeing the world and getting to know ourselves as a person. And then it gets into some of the nuts and bolts of what is it like to teach people? What is it like to really work with people and drive results? So I wanted to call that out. The course is wakingupaleader.com, and you can find it at daphne-scott.com. as well.
That's awesome. And Daphne, let me ask you just one question. As I'm listening to this as a potential listener, what would you say is the biggest transformation I would experience as a leader if I went through this course? What will I have in my life on the other side of it?
Yeah, the skills to lead people, and the stress that you have experienced not having those skills also will be decreased exponentially, because you will have the tools. I think that's the important part. You will have the tools that you need in your back pocket to really work with people and lead an effective team. So your effectiveness level in your work will go up exponentially, and your stress recedes considerably.
Love it.
I would benchmark those two things for sure.
Effectiveness in your leadership up, skills attained, and less stress in your life.
Yes.
And where can they find this course?
At daphne-scott.com, and it is Waking Up a Leader is the course. It's right on the front page of my website. You can't miss it.
Love it. Awesome. My call to action is something, Daphne, that I think you just dropped in at the last part of one of our conversations here. And it is the fact that I have a special coaching package for somebody who is at the precipice of change,
Yes.
who is ready to take and make a big leap into something new.
Yes.
And sometimes it would be great if you could just get out of your own environment for a little while, break up your habitual routines and your hypnotic way of living, and
I
get
love it.
into a different location, a different space. And what if you could be immersed in what it is that you want to create in this world? And what if you could have a mentor or a guide or a coach who could help you process all the things you need to process and gain clarity so that when you leave that experience, you know exactly who you are, what your game plan is, and what to do next. This
Mm.
is exactly what I have to offer for anyone who is contemplating massive change in their life. It's called the Day with Cliff package, and you can learn all about it at daywithcliff.com.
Highly recommend it. And I think there was a post you put out about it too. I mean, my experience with you has been, I think we've got that dialed in at this point, but highly recommend it. I've done it twice.
Yep.
I've done 2 days with Cliff. Separate days. Separate time. That would be a lot to do it 2 days in a row, but also worth it.
Well, check it out, daywithcliff.com. I finally got that sales page up and running since we mentioned it in the podcast. I'm like, I think that's going to be my call to action for those who are looking for significant, massive change in their life.
Yeah.
Daphne, this is always so much fun. I'm going to let you say the closing words and I'll end our live stream here.
I love it. Well, we hope that you have enjoyed this show today, this podcast, and that you're making your best moves as you play this game of life. You can find us at chooseyourownadventurepodcast.com. So that's where you can find the show. Of course, you can find it on all of your favorite podcast apps as well. You can also find Cliff at cliffravenscraft.com. So go check out his website and look at the Day with Cliff package. I could not more recommend that. I'm more highly if you ask me to. And then you can find me at daphne-scott.com and the leadership course, which is Waking Up a Leader. You can find that on my website as well. Feel free to drop us a line. If you get in the show notes, you can drop us a line and leave us a comment, ask us a question. Maybe there's something you want to hear us talk about. And we're happy to dive into that too. So let us know and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.